Coming up this week on the Digital Lifestyle Show, we've got a bit of a different show this week. We're talking synths with Dr Jezz. We talked to him a few weeks ago and he took on a little tour of his studio. So we're going to have another quick tour of his studio, looking at some of the synths we didn't get a chance to talk about last time. Some of the difference between the mono synths, the poly synths, the virtual ones, the actual ones, the recreation, the boutiques, that kind of thing. So it's a bit of a musical synth theme tonight, and we've got a couple of examples of what the synths sound like as well. But it was great just to catch up with Dr Jezz and just to go back to his studio. So enjoy this one. Dr Jezz, welcome back to the show. I appreciate you joining. You've been flying around all over, so it was great to get you back on the show.
Yeah,
we had a great response to the show that you were on a couple of months ago now, and we talked about your summer synths, and I thought we'd get it back on because we only really touched on like a couple of them, and so I wanted to chat to you a bit about some of the others and just some of the things that you do with the synths, sort of owning synths and all that kind of stuff. It's a really interesting subject, and there's some nice little synths on the back there that we only got to briefly touch on last time. So welcome back to the show.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so we last time we talked quite a lot about the Poly 6 that you've got there, and the Jupiter 8 as well. You've still got So but you've also got I got the Oberheim. I don't think we talked too much about the Oberheim. Really briefly talked about that.
I'm always happy to talk about the Oberheim.
Is that your favourite of your poly synths, would you say?
Yeah, it's close between that and the Jupiter 8, but there's something about the Oberheim. I just love the Oberheim. I still think it's the most undervalued synth out there. Because people always talk about it and they say, "Oh, Oberheims cost a fortune." Actually, they're not. They don't really. I mean, they've last couple of years, some of them have got hyperinflated, but for what they are, and considering everybody's, we've got the OB8 out there, haven't we? We've got the GeForce software versions, all the software. Everybody wants the sound of it. Yet the second-hand value has never gone through the roof like the Jupiter 8s for some reason. Which I kind of find strange, but I put it up there as easily important to me as a Jupiter 8. So for that reason, I think they're undervalued. I love them. Yeah.
What's the current sort of value that you see? So it's hard to say, isn't it? But
it's difficult without looking at what's happened this week, kind of thing. I mean, people will. I think if I remember correctly, people have them up for $8,000, but they won't sell them for $8,000. Yeah, they'll sell them for maybe $5,000. I would guess something like that. I mean, when I got my Prophet 5, because as I said, I always go back to that because I was just never hugely into it. They were going for $7,000-8,000. Yet somebody came to me, just wanted to sell it, and said, "I'll take $3,500." And that wasn't like a million years ago. So if you're in the right place with cash and somebody really wants to sell, mind you, they are quite rare, I suppose. So being in the right place with cash is half the thing. But it took me years to get the Oberheim. I think I did mention, actually. Yeah, I mean, I waited years and years and years. I tried out different ones, and I think I mentioned I went round to Kent Spong's to try one out. That was just totally malfunctioning at the time and nearly put me off. But the Oberheim is great. I've got to do a bit of work on that one. The capacitors in the power supply have never been done, so it's a bit. What's weird is I hear the Oberheim vintage synths. Funnily enough, none of which I think sound like an Oberheim until I haven't actually tried out, because I've been in the States all week. I bought the new GeForce Oberheim plug while I was away, and I literally have not had time to play it yet. I just scraped in here to get in the studio with minutes to spare. But I know from the previous 4-voice software they did that they've nailed that sound. But what I found funny about the plugs is you can play bass lines on them that's, like perfectly in tune sounding bass lines, and certainly my Oberheim is not like that. You know, I don't think many are. But maybe when I replace all the caps, somebody in the States sells a kit of all the caps for about 100 quid. Yeah, they're probably charging shed loads extra, but they know exactly what caps, and they've specified really good caps. So when I do that, fortunately online, I think Synths or somebody, I don't know who it is, has put up really good videos of how to calibrate them. So I will recalibrate the Oberheim. And then maybe I will be able to do those really, really tight sounding bass lines. But I would guess that most Oberheims out in the wild right now aren't really good at that. But what they are great at is, you know, pads, just beautiful pads. They're not big stringy sounding pads like the Jupiter, but just kind of more hollow haunting a lot of the time, and big brutal sounds. I mean, I've got that program full of lots of stupid sound. I think I went through a period when I was programming it a while ago. I just liked massive, ridiculous sounds, a bit along the lines of Tom Sawyer. It's got tons of those in. But I often find you can keep a synth because there are just one or two patches that you like. I know that doesn't go down well with a lot of people who want a million modulation options, but I think for a lot of people who just, it's the core sound that matters, you can have just one sound or one or two sounds in a ballpark, and that's what you keep that synth for, because nothing else sounds quite like it. And that's the Oberheim to me. That.
And you said, so when you do the caps, is that something you'll do yourself, or do you have someone that you do use for it?
Yeah, well, I've got someone that I use for it in mid Wales. You know, he absolute genius. Bennett Cyberwave. You know, but we've got to a point now. Everyone's waiting list is so massive. You kind of want to avoid sending your gear anywhere if you possibly can. I mean, I have in the past, like, driven down to Ben and dropped things off, you know, personally there, and picked stuff up afterwards. Although he does drop-offs in London and various places along the way, and he's top notch. He's really good actually with Oberheims, I have to say. He knows Oberheim OBXAs and OB8s inside out. He would be a good choice, but as I may have mentioned last time, if you see that little blue light over there, that was my last soldering project to make myself repeat soldering over and over again. There are something like 700 solder joints on the LEDs, because that's purely LEDs all just attached together. So, you know, once you've done 700 in a row, you kind of your technique starts to be just about good enough for doing stuff. So yeah, I'll do that myself. And
that Oberheim is what, 80, is it 82, 83, something like that?
Thereabouts. You tell me, to be honest. I can't remember. Around about there, I think. So I suppose the caps start to go. It's the power supply ones, isn't it? No, that's it. I mean, they need doing, so I've got to do them anyway. And an added bonus, I suppose, is I'll get a nice solid bass line out of it. But I personally wouldn't use an Oberheim for bass lines. They've never really been used for anything that much. I would always use the Pro 1 or the SH101 or the SH2 monosynths, because here's the thing: like when I first started out, I wasn't really, well, I always loved SH101s back in the day, but, you know, we always like a bargain, don't we? And I always used to think, well, if I get a polysynth, that's, you know, 6 or 8 monosynths in one. Why do I want a monosynth? And it took me years and years to realize that, you know, monosynths, particularly because they're only one oscillator and they stay in tune with themselves, are completely different to polysynths. And you go to monosynths for certain jobs and you go to polysynths for others. I mean, it's different nowadays, I guess, when you have digital synths, because the digital monosynth would sound exactly like a digital polysynth. And of course, people always argue that the monosynths, the amount of drive in the circuit is different from that in polysynths, because in polysynths you have a lot less drive in the circuit because you got so many more oscillators always going in at the same time. You can kind of get a more aggressive sound out of monosynth, and I kind of poo-pooed that for years and years, but I you know, it's true now. So yeah, if I want a bass line, I go to a bass synth.
So we didn't really talk so much about the monosynths last time. So the couple, I can see the Roland ones there.
I can take you across a bit if you want.
Yeah, let's have a look. I think the one that everybody will immediately see is the SH101, which is kind of the iconic monosynth bass synth from the early 80s, especially when people had them with the guitar thing on them, and you see them playing Top of the Pops with that on.
Yeah, well, that's true, but really, if you want guitar, that's your baby down there, the Casio AZ1.
Oh, that's a mid-80s one as well, isn't it?
That's kind of the sister keyboard of the CZ3000. They you can plug them into each other, and all the controls control each other. But the big advantage of the AZ1 was always that it's a pressure sensitive keyboard as well, so it was actually pretty advanced for its time. And I drove all the way down to Bristol from Liverpool one night because was it MS Synths, whoever it was, has just closed down in Bristol. He had one in stock, and I just drove all the way down, picked it up, drove all the way back in an evening. So yeah, we were talking about tune-up routines before. This SH101, obviously I've got the key grip for it. Hold on 2 seconds. I said before, I'm not a collector, but obviously you've got to have the key grip if you've got one of these. So there's the key grip. And I've also got the original strap, the Roland strap for that as well. So although it sits there without it, it's got the full works, as you were saying. No messing around with these. And absolutely.
Here is Synths patched through. I thought I'd get him to do a little bit of a comparison. So what you're hearing now is the SH101, then the SH02, then the SH101. So you can hear the difference between the two synths.
Rubbery sound. In fact, there's nothing like it. I've got the SH101 and I've got the SH01A there. So that's kind of this is the Roland ACB model version of it.
Yeah.
And actually, it's really good. So I've got that. So I've got patch memories. It hasn't worked as well as I thought it would, because what happens is if I come up with a sound I really like on this, I try to copy it in there, and you can't. It's not that they don't have the same sound quality, because they absolutely do have the same sound quality, but all the slider positions will be so far different, and you'll never get exactly that sound. But it'd be the same the other way around. If you've got a sound that you really, really like on the SH01A, you'd probably never, ever quite get it on the SH101 either. So I'd say, they are very equivalent. They're as close as really makes no odds, but there's just something about playing the SH101 there and having the full sliders. Absolutely adore that synth. Sure. Okay.
Yeah, so the what's the module called? The roll one just below there.
The SH01A.
Yeah, that's the boutique version of it, isn't it? Yeah. So they are kind of so it's quite interesting to see that they sound similar or pretty close together, because sometimes you get the reproductions, they never quite sound the same. But
here's the thing, actually, there's a thread on GS going right now with I think MKS Lover, who's come back under a different name. He's one of the guys on there you see a lot, and there's a huge argument about how close, as usual, plugs are to the hardware. And he's kind of like saying, I've got all the original Roland hardware and the plugs don't sound anything like it. Whereas I, on the other hand, I've got not only the O1A there, I've got the Roland plugs for when I'm recording ITB in the box. And they're as close as makes no odds. For the Juno 106 down here, I don't know if you can see that well enough on the camera. Can you see that? Okay.
Yeah.
I was amazed checking the presets out and actually going through a filter sweep as to how accurate the Roland plug was. to the Juno. I mean, it's really good. The SH2 again for me sounds really good. And the Jupiter 8, kind of close, but no cigar on that one. If for simple sounds, like simple pads, honestly, by the time you put effects on it and it was in a mix, you honestly could not tell the difference at all. But on the other hand, if you tried some of the really cool sync sounds on it, I mean, the Jupiter 8 for sync sounds is absolutely amazing. I'm a bit of a sucker for sync sounds, and the plug version just cannot get it the same. It kind of sounds a bit similar, but it just absolutely isn't. So my own personal take, and everyone's going to be different, is that the Roland ACB stuff for the SH101, the 106, certainly, and the SH2, and I'm sure, you know, for a lot of the drum machines and other Roland stuff that I haven't got. What other Roland stuff have I got? Just a VP 550 over there. It does the job so well. Don't get worried if you haven't got the analog original. You accept that you just can't sit in front of it and do that.
Yeah,
really
yeah.
nice.
Yeah, and I suppose you probably could do something like I do with the Modwave. I've got the Modwave Native, and I spend quite a bit of time the sound design on a track, maybe using the Modwave, and then when I'm happy with that track, I then fire up the native version and push the patch to it, and then do the next track with the Modwave. And I suppose you can kind of do that, can't you? Use the real synth, happy with that, push it to the
well, I mean, yeah, no, totally, and I think that's one of the arguments that a lot of people don't get about one, having a hardware synth, and two, having it absolutely sound perfect, is because you're using these, I think, on the whole, for inspiration and for enjoyment, and the plugs inside the box for doing the job. You know, I would say that's kind of how things work or can work most of the time. So people say, oh, you know, it's so close that once it's in a mix you'll never spot it. Yeah, but the point is, when you're just sitting down with it in the studio on its own and waiting to put effects on it, you want to have something that sounds incredible and it inspires you, and it might just be that extra little bit. And I think that's the argument for having the hardware, isn't it, at the end of the day?
I think so. Yeah, because like I said, even with a digital synth like the Modwave, I do prefer the hardware version. But like you said, once it's done its job, you can push it to the native version. And I just like any of the synths, even the DX. You know, I've got the TX7 over here. A proper, you know, you can recreate that. It's digital synth, but there's something about having that hearing it coming out of that little box. It's it's slightly different.
Yeah, no, totally. I mean, I've got a load of other synths as well that you can't see in here, dotted around and crammed in places, like a Korg T2 EX down there. So yeah, it's the same thing again. I've got the Korg plugins in the box, and they sound exactly the same. It has to be said, but you know, every so often, if you actually get the hardware out and have a play around with it, it just takes you straight down memory lane and takes you to a different place, doesn't it? Frankly.
Yeah, so you talk about the SH1. I know traditionally great for bass lines. Yeah. Used on loads of stuff in the 80s. How different is that from the SH2 that you've got?
This actually replaced my Mini Moog Model D because it's thick. Almost that kind of sound. I'm going to turn it up a bit. No.
Yeah, unfortunately, we don't get. It's not picking it up on the audio.
That's rubbery and plasticky. That kind of reminds him of the Human League or something. It's a great big massive beast. You know, it's only 2 oscillator, but it's got a sub oscillator as well, so you can kind of hear it's got a thick sound that you would get out of a Moog. Also, that kind of full range sound. One of the things about it is, okay, that's definitely a bass line, but you can hear right the treble you can hear the whole kind of through the whole sound, whereas the SH101 kind of much more circumscribed, precise. So 70s fight sounding obese thing, lovely 80s, 90s. It just doesn't age the SH101, I don't think. Anyway, I'm going to switch the sound around now.
Okay.
So I can talk to you. Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah. So it's interesting that you've got those two. You mentioned about the O2 is kind of has that sort of Human League sound. I think that earlier versions of the Rolands have that. I used to have, or a friend used to have, an SH101, which sounded, which was a great synth, and he picked that up. I think for about 50 quid or something like that.
Really?
In 88, 89. Just when it was about the same time as I got my Gen SX1000. Because the mono synths in that. I think it was about 88, just before Acid House and just before the sort of that sound came out. People were just giving them, we're just virtually giving away. They couldn't give them away. So we had some great fun back in the day playing with that because it could get some really good sounds out of it. And I think it sounds more like the O2 than it does the SH101.
Well, it's the one oscillator version of the SH2.
Yeah.
So that it is. It's this minus one oscillator, and you're absolutely right. You recognise that sound. It's that thick, thick kind of 70s X-esque sound, but also, like I say, quite a moogie sound. And frankly, I prefer it to a mini moog. There are going to be people screaming at me for saying that, but I know quite a few people feel the same way.
Yeah. And then you've got the Pro one above it, which is a different kind of, synth compared to the other two there. It's a mono synth, but a different sound to it.
Yeah, it's again, I'll have to get so I can record through it. So I've gone on and on. I don't know why I've gone on so much about the Prophet 5 I got rid of. I never really worked with it, and it's not because I didn't think it produced good sounds, because it does. It just works for me as a mono, whereas the 5-note poly limitation and all that kind of thing. So classic again, a different sound, not as thick and obese as this one, but it's one of those the sound in your head synths. If we could play it now, I'd be able to. I'd point it out. There are just certain sounds you dial in, and I go, yeah, that's my Pro 1 bass sound, and it's lovely. I mean, a lot of people are really into the fact, it's got all the extra modulation, all the you can different modulations and stuff on it. I'm ridiculous. I don't have any complex synths. Well, I do actually. But I just like really simple synths. Yeah. Every one of my synths is chosen because of its core sound, and that's all I really want from it. If I want something wild and really modulated, I'll just go to Native Instruments and put some strange instrument in, and I'll get all that back. So again, I just make nice, really straightforward 2 oscillator sounds with this. One of the things I find about the sequential stuff is you have to be really very precise about your cutoffs and your attacks and stuff. Quite a lot of the time, the knobs go a long way, they don't do anything, and then you suddenly get into a range and you just got to dial them in. It's one of its little idiosyncrasies. But one thing that's great with the CV inputs on this, it's got a filter CV input. So you see, I've got stuff off actually at the moment I think I'm running this off the Arturia key stack, because this is got pressure sensitivity,
right?
You can pressure sensitivity into the filter, and it's just a lovely way of playing the Pro 1. In fact, when I had my Mini Moog, my favorite thing about the Mini Moog was actually playing the Pro 1 with the Mini Moog, because the Mini Moogs, the reissue Mini Moog has got one of the best keyboards I've ever felt, and the pressure sensitivity is brilliant. And actually playing a Pro 1 with pressure sensitivity, if you want to play solos and stuff like that, is really, really good. So yeah, that's that's a big plus, the Pro one. It's got an external input as well. You know, it's one of those synths that you can run other stuff through if you want to. I'm quite simple. I never get that complicated, to be honest. If I wanted to do stuff like that, I'd probably just go to Sound Toys in the box. You know, you've got enough effects units and filters in the box. I'd probably do it there. But if you want to, I mean, I seem to remember that Eat Static used to put a lot of stuff through the external filter on the Pro One, as I remember. I could be wrong, but I think they did.
Yeah, it's something that always sounds quite appealing. I've got a Minilogue, and I quite often put the DX or the TX7 through that and get a bit sort of analog filter on it. But I must admit, it's not something I do very often because it requires a bit of fiddling around with the cables and everything else, and then you've got to get them in sync. So yeah, I think probably it's something I should do more often, but it makes it more complicated. But the CV actually makes it a little bit more appealing, I think, than just using MIDI for it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, that is. So yeah,
and then I noticed that you've got is that a Roland Space Echo?
Yeah, Space Echo.
That? Yeah.
Can you see?
Oh yeah, you can see. Yeah, so the tape heads. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just lovely in there because, you know, one in good condition, particularly. You know, it's like they left the studio or they left the factory yesterday. They're just so lovely because they've been protected inside that box. Again, as long as you get a good one, there's always that caveat. So yeah, I love, really, to be honest, what I really wanted was, right, I'm going to put this back in now. Is that all right? Does that look okay?
Yeah, fine, yeah.
The first Echo I ever fell in love with was actually a Korg. When I was a kid, a friend of mine had a Korg tape Echo, and I just remember sitting down like for an entire day, just being amazed by echo sounds that came out of it. And I was always chasing that dream. And in some ways, the Space Echo hasn't quite caught that Korg thing. But then again, I haven't seen any Korg Echoes around, and I'm not sure that even if I got one of the Korg ones now, it's going to influence me the way, you know, it did when I was, 13 and was hearing an Echo for the first time. But yeah, I mean, the Space Echo sounds amazing. I hate the reverb on it. You know, one of the things about it is people want the reverb because it's that classic dub reggae sound, isn't it? You just put something through the spring reverb, and you're immediately there. But I am not a big spring reverb fan. I remember having to use spring reverbs when, you know, run things through the spring reverb of my Carlsberg combo keyboard amp back in the day just to get a bit of reverb sound, and it sounded horrible, and I've got no great desire for them. I mean, I hear people talking about the Korg 2600 issue, 2600 issue, and saying, oh, you want it just for the spring reverb. I think you're going to be nuts to spend £4,000 just for spring reverb. But here, I'm sitting here surrounded by this stuff, so how could I say that's nuts? Yeah, and I have been tempted by that myself, actually, I must admit, but yeah, I'm not going to. But yeah, Space Echo sounds great. But again, in all honesty, I think if you just bought, you know, the modern version of the Roland Space Echo pedal, you're 99.5% of the way there. You don't need one of those. Advantage of that, I suppose, it's got a preamp, and you can run things through the preamp, and you can get different sounds and stuff. It just looks cool. I do love it. That's another one I got for a really good price. A guy was selling it on eBay about, it was a few years ago, but still they were going for a good old price then. But it was pickup only. And because it was pickup only, I got my stepmother to drive to a shed in the middle of a field in Yorkshire somewhere and pick it up for £700. You know, they were already selling for £1,500 then. But it always comes back to on GS, everyone will quote a price, and it's normally 2 or 3 times the price that you actually see things advertised for anyway. And then the other side of it is, you never pay the price that things are advertised for. It's just you rarely do that anyway. So I absolutely love the Space Echo. It's just great. Just switch it on and immediately you're into a lovely place.
And is that the only effects you're using now, or do you use everything, or do you use all the hardware effects?
Yeah, my hardware effects. I'll show you this bit of my studio you haven't seen yet. Over here.
Yeah.
So, can you see all this okay?
Yeah.
So, these are the only hardware effects I use. Otherwise, I've got my original Tokai delay. Obviously, I couldn't get hold of a tape. If I probably wouldn't have wanted a tape delay back in the day, so I got this Tokai tape delay, and actually this was made under license from Boss. So this is actually the classic box bucket brigade delay that everyone waxes lyrical about. Boss heavy metal, just because Chemical Brothers.
Right, yeah.
They just turn everything up full, run things through it, and they just get amazing noise out of it. And that's it. It's not subtle, but some things it does really well. Turbo Rat. This was, a lot of people like this on the 303s, I guess. I haven't got any 303s, not massively interested in a 303. I'd do that in the box if I want to get a sound like that. But yeah, Turbo Rat. I've got a couple of Wazacrafts. So this is the Wazacraft CE2W. So this has got two of the classic choruses in. It's got the original CE1, I think the original CE1 chorus. And it's got the more modern CE2, so I use that just only on bass lines. One I love most of all is the Wazacraft Dimension C. Everything I own goes through the Dimension pedal. Like an Oberheim or a Jupiter with absolutely not going through anything, and I know there's a lot of people that say, I like to judge my analog synths just by hearing them on their own. They sound crap unless you at least, but this is my opinion, and I've got them here. As soon as you put them through a Dimension C, it's like you're hearing what you heard on a record, because that's what everyone did with them in the studio. Then immediately after that, Mercury 7, Meris Mercury 7, I just really, really like that reverb. And the Strymon Zelza phaser. That just ends the endless search for phasers. I've got a couple of other phasers around somewhere in here, but when you get a Strymon Zelza, you just don't need to do that search for that amazing phaser sound in your head. You can get it on there. You can get a phaser sound out of it. You can get a chorus sound out of it. You can get a flange out of it. It's absolutely brilliant. For anything phasing, it's really good. But above all, everything goes through the Dimension D on a send from my subgroups in the desk. There's nothing I wouldn't put through a Dimension C. Occasionally, I put a bass synth just through the chorus on its own, but that would be the only time. Otherwise, every single synth, except even the Juno with its own built-in chorus. I think sometimes I'll send it through a Dimension, and just a bit thicker again. Yeah, but I just can't say enough how I couldn't exist without a Dimension C. Just makes everything sound better. Yeah.
And is it was it stereo expander? Is that what you call it?
It's well, you see, some people say it's chorus, but it's not really a chorus. That's why they called it a dimension. It's like a chorus that's standing still. So a stereoizer, I suppose you could call it to a degree. But imagine your chorus going like this, and you just slow it down, and it doesn't move. Now,
Yeah.
a lot of people go, "Oh, I can't be bothered with that. It's too subtle. It doesn't do anything for me." And they're kind of like missing the point. That the point of a dimension is it's something. It's not an effect you notice until you switch it off. And then when you switch it off, and the whole stereo field collapses, and you go, "Oh my goodness!
Yeah.
What's happened? That was amazing." Like I say, if we get the sound sorted out, I'll show you. And
we'll do
I
it.
just suggest everybody who hasn't got a Dimension C and has a synth that doesn't have built-in effects and wants them just goes out, and because you can even get the Behringer version. I don't want to really sit here and direct people to go buy Behringer, because I'm not particularly fond of it myself. But and apparently I mean, it's not as good as the Wazacraft, not quite as good sounding as the Wazacraft, but you can buy a pair of those really dirt cheap. So yeah, there's no barrier to entry with those really, but you need it.
Yeah, that's quite interesting. I route my TX7 through. I've got a 1990 Boss RE1000 digital reverb, which you find very little about them.
I've got one over there, I think.
Yeah. And I've patched my TX7 permanently through that because it just adds that dimension to it when you put a bit of stereo on it.
Yeah. No, mine's an SD 1000 over there, SDE 1000, which unfortunately doesn't work. Well, it is why it's over there. I've been meaning to try and get into it with a soldering iron. I'm still on Boston time at the moment, so I'm still getting there. But yeah, no, I know.
That feels just you can get if you're going with a DX bass sound, it's okay. But if you're going with the EP sound, as soon as you just add that bit of reverb, it comes alive. Because, like you said, that's how you heard the records back in the day. No one ever.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and quite often I'll record and then add the effects afterwards as a insert or whatever. But when you're playing about with ideas, it's like you said earlier, it sparks the imagination. Hearing that electric piano, the DX electric piano with loads of reverb, takes you back to that era, doesn't it? Whereas if you try to add it later, you've not got that inspiration at that point. I might take it off and digitally add it back later or whatever. But yeah, while you're doing it, it's great.
No, I agree. I mean, in some ways, I think, what's the point of having these, hardware stuff though, when I can just run all my stuff straight through Logic and just monitor through Logic with a load of stuff in there. And the point is that sometimes you just want to switch something on and have everything in front of you without bothering with the computer, and have everything tactile, hands-on, and just work with it in the moment. And that's exactly it. That's why I've got those sitting there when, in theory, you don't really need them, I guess.
Yeah. And we talked a bit about the MonoPoly, but I can see that, don't think we saw it last time. But yeah, it's looking great. I am a big fan of the MonoPoly, and I see the I've got the software version, but it would be nice. There's something about the hardware version of the MonoPoly.
Yeah, no, there is, and also I've got to say that the software version, again, I originally. Right, can you see it in it? Okay, again. I originally bought the Korg software version with the idea in mind of when I got a preset on the MonoPoly, I'd copy it into the Korg software, and I just have all my favorite patches in there. It cannot be done. It's way more different than the SH101 and the SH101A.
Right.
It just cannot be done. They are just different. Mm-hmm. I think it's one of those examples that I think the Korg, I mean, it sounds good. It's not that it doesn't sound bad or anything like that, but it has all the same features as the MonoPoly, but just not implemented in quite the same way, and doesn't sound quite the same. I mean, the MonoPoly is magical just because it just does things that surprise you. I didn't get it at first. A friend of mine had one of these back in school, and my interest, obviously would have been the Poly 6 or the Juno 106 or whatever. And I was kind of like, hold on, it's a monosynth, but it can be a polysynth sometimes, but it's not really polyphonic, and it's got an effects section on it that isn't really an effects section, and you never got it. But the point is, it's just like with the. I mean, the simplest thing that everyone knows about it is because you got the 4 oscillators. You can sit there, and if you just play a repeated chord, you'll trigger one of the notes each time with a different oscillator. And if you've got the oscillator on a slightly different waveform or a slightly different octave or something, just repeating one chord over and over in the background, you get this bouncing round of notes, and you get this lovely, really interesting harmonic interest, almost like note leading in a bit of Bach or something like that. You just got notes popping around all over the place, and it just sounds brilliant with zero effort, absolutely zero effort. Again, oscillator sync on a monopoly is, it is mad. And yeah, there's a quote that I get really annoyed about that you get people using every so often, saying that Vince Clarke said a monopoly sounds like 4 cheap synths in a box. Well, and I know where that's from as well, because I realized that from Musine's site, Musine's, the original monopoly review that that was done in 1-2 Testing or whatever magazine was in there, was done by Vince Clarke. They gave him one, and he really didn't like it, because as we know, he was a Pro One man through and through. But 4 cheap synths in a box is still one expensive synth, when you come to it. And I think it sounds absolutely brilliant. And with a 4 oscillator monosynth, it can sound huge and thick. So for me, I'd say I prefer it to Vince Clarke's loved Pro One, or the Pro One Special in its own way. I just adore the mad things the monopoly does. I'm just surprised at you all the time.
It's that randomness, isn't it?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I always have to go back and remind myself what trigger and auto damp do. I can never seem to get in my head and remember what they do. I have to remind myself the whole time. But yeah, the total randomness. And another great thing about it as well is, because you tune all the oscillators in yourself, my 4th oscillator is way out of tune, but it doesn't matter, because you just tune each oscillator independently. So even, I think as these things age, it doesn't really matter, because you can still get all the oscillators in tune. You just turn the oscillator to wherever you want. So, that's another nice thing with it, really.
Yeah, it is. It's a nice synth. I know Behringer do a copy of that as well. It'd be interesting to see what that's like. Does that sound like the software version, or does it sound like the hardware version?
No, it sounds like the hardware version. I mean, that's had really, really good reports, particularly from, what's that guy's name? A synth guy plays a lot of vintage synths, Kaku or something like that. He does a lot of work on the monopoly, and certainly he says it's bob on. However, I know on the thread on GS when it first came out, there are all kinds of sequencing issues. And initially when they came out, the filters all had to be manually calibrated again, because they were way darker than they should have been and all that kind of thing. So, I mean, I don't know where they are now, but regardless of all those, that have been issues with it, apparently it sounds really, really good. So, that's fine. But I know which I'd rather have.
Yes, there's something about that. Yeah. And I think that probably the Monopoly was another one of those ones in the category in the late 80s. You could probably get them really cheap, because they were really out of fashion, and for cheap. I was like, with that kind of. But actually now they're much sought after. But they're quite expensive, aren't they? Now when you try and find one of those. Yeah,
I think so. I mean, I don't know, maybe about. It's impossible to say, and again, there's the price that's advertised and the price you actually pay. I'd expect you could probably get one for about 1,500 quid, I would think.
Yeah.
But the advantage of buying one of those for 1,500 quid is it'll still be worth 1,500 quid when you come to sell it, or possibly more. Whereas your Behringer, when you buy it, will be hard. You'll have lost money the second you buy it. So if you can afford to buy the MonoPoly, it's cheaper than the Behringer, if you think about it that way.
Yeah. Yeah, but it looks nice as well. It's got that classic analog synth dials on it. It's not unlike the Gen actually, but the wooden
well actually that often occurred to me. The actual buttons on the top of it with the light coloured buttons on the top. Yeah, there definitely is a similarity there. I mean, this one has a like my Poly 61 has had a completely replaced wood case. It's got which upgrade is it? Is it the Turbotech? I think Turbotech MIDI Poly upgrade. I think it's the Turbotech. Oh no, it's not the Turbotech. It's the other one. It's the one that also replaces the power unit on the back and actually gives you an IEC cable on the back, which is really, really good as well. So this one will actually take standard kettle lead. And has lots of extra little features and is fully MIDI'd, etc., etc. So so for one in this condition, you'd definitely be paying more than 1,500 quid. I mean, I was really lucky with this one actually. When I got it, I didn't actually realise because this is one I actually bought off eBay. It was one of those kind of you had a couple of beers and I was thinking, oh, that seems like it's going for a good price. And I didn't actually realize the whole case had been replaced when I got it. And I was just been over the moon. Just really like the MonoPoly. It's well, they're all the same, aren't they? You have an emotional interaction with all of these things, some more than others, but definitely the MonoPoly is one. I suppose because it's down on ground level and I've made sure that I can reach and see all the different knobs on it, you can tell I think it's an important one, I guess.
Yes, that's it. Yeah, it is. Yeah, where the hands on, you can go immediately to it. Yeah.
So other stuff up here. I mean, it's not a vintage analog, but the Roland VP 550 voice processor. It's just one of the best vocoders ever. I know a lot more vocoders have come out recently, and there's particularly one in Propellerhead in Reason that's out now. It's about 100 quid though. That vocoder is amazing, but I always find that about 90% of vocoders out there are just they're just pretty crap. Whereas this VP550, it just sounds like the vocoder sound that you thought you wanted. I think it's exactly the same unit that's in the Roland the Phantom synth. I think it's the same. It's based on that VP Veriphrase technology, I think, if I'm correct, and it just sounds great. If you have a look at some of the demos on YouTube, the VP 550 done by some people with gospel choirs, it's mind blowing. But it's just a simple thing. You go up to it, you sing in, and you just get absolute crystal clear vocoders. You can understand what it's saying, and it's got great choral backing at the same time. I was put onto that by Ned from the Egg. I don't know if you know the Egg. They're most famous for a remix, "Don't Let Me Go" by. It was huge. It was massive for a while, but they're a pretty well-known electronica band that started out in Oxford back in the day. Ned put me onto that because that's what he used to use all the time live. In fact, he's using another one now because he managed to find another one. He tends to break all his gear. There's this thing about Ned, my friend, who's a professional musician and just gigs every night practically. You'll ask where he is. He'll be somewhere in London, or he'll be at somebody's house in Spain doing a gig, or something like that. He is a real musician, totally uses his gear, and it's all knackered. It gets thrown around. Doesn't get looked after, but it gets used a load, which is always the joke. Whereas because I've hardly got time to be in here because I've, like last week I was in Boston all week and I've just managed to get into the studio now. I have this lovely pristine example sitting here.
Yeah.
He will just destroy them on a regular basis and beg, borrow, or steal. In fact, I've seen. I think the first time I got to hear about this, he was going to Germany and he just said, "Is there anyone in Germany who's got a Roland VP 550 for me to use in my gig?" And I think so. And I got one from somebody. Somebody in Germany kind of went, "Yeah, I've got one." Anyway, so that's the VP 550, which is a great synth.
Yeah, and I think that the vocoder, I can do the vocoder with the Radius or the MS2000. It's something I use occasionally, but it is a lovely effect, isn't it? But yeah, it's something used sparingly.
Yeah, and also, I mean, I just find it's a really elusive effect just to get it right.
Yeah.
I mean, things like Kelly Watch the Stars, like that famous track. I think if you get a line that you can just repeat the same line all over again, and it's just about intelligible enough, you can get away with it. But if you actually try to start singing through it, you soon run into problems. Everything's unintelligible and totally pointless. But that does it quite well.
So I think we're just about running out of time now. So I need to let you go and finish your glass of wine.
Yeah.
and catch up with your folk. It was really great to catch up with you, and I think this is just really whetting my appetite. So I think next time we'll do is a bit more of a dive on the individual synths, and we'll get the audio out of the synths as well, so that we can do a bit of a dive on what some of these sound like.
Because always you tend to get on YouTube a guy saying, "This is what this synth sounds like," and he'll play the same chords over and over again. I mean, really handy. People like Retrosound. Really good. Forever does anyone go, "So that's what that sounds like, and that's what that sounds like next to it," because that's the only way you'll ever get to tell, because they all sound so massively different to each other. But that's it. So that's what we need to. We need to compare these. So I really do appreciate you taking the time to, on the way home from Boston and London and everywhere else, to come and chat with us today. Yeah. So we'll get this set up and we'll do some deep diving into the synths. So really appreciate that. So thanks for joining us today. You're welcome. See you next time. Bye.